Fitness Pro Mentor community, welcome to another episode of this wonderful business podcast. Glenn and I are extremely excited because today we're going to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, and I know it has become very important for Glenn over the last few years, and it's talking about discipline. And this was really inspired to thinking about a lot of our students, because truthfully, when I think about people who succeed and those who do not succeed as fast, there's an element of discipline that's a part of that. But before we get started, wonderful co-host, Glenn, how you doing today?
Cloud number 9, Brandon. How are you doing?
I'm good. Cloud number 9. What does cloud number 9 mean?
I think it means just being in love with life.
What is cloud number 8 though?
I don't know. So we'll have to look it up. We'll have to do some diving.
Cloud 9. Oh, I like it. I'm glad to hear, man. That's great.
We should really look that up. I'll look it up. We'll come back with the answer next podcast.
My son would immediately go, "I'm cloud 1,000,001." And you're like, okay, well now we're here. We're going higher and higher.
We're just having a measuring contest right now.
That's right. Anyway, discipline.
Discipline.
Speaking of discipline, we just lost her. Anyway, that was my fault. We're going to talk about discipline today, and here's one of the reasons why. This is a much deeper subject than saying something as simple as you need to be disciplined. Ultimately, if you're going to succeed at anything, call it fitness, call it business, call it learning an instrument, call it dieting, call it your relationship, there needs to be an element of discipline. There needs to be an element of focus. There needs to be an element of you understanding the potential consequences of this thing not going the direction you're going to help you have laser focus on the thing that you're doing. Discipline has been something that I think about quite literally every day with every single action that I take, because ultimately I have clear objectives in my head of what I'm aiming towards for my life. And it's not just monetary, it's not just family, it's all these different facets all at once. And the question is, well, how committed am I to these goals? How do I exercise discipline each time? Now, I know you've talked to me about becoming a more disciplined person over the years.
Right.
What's that journey been like for you?
I think for most people, it's up and down. Discipline, I think, can be complicated, but it also be quite simple. And for me, I think in a word, when I think about discipline, it's the ability to relentlessly continue to pursue an objective or a goal in the face of obstacles. And that could look like you're running a business, you run at a capital, or if you're trying to get leaner, you always you crave food late at night time because you've been in a calorie deficit, or you want to get stronger, but you don't love going to the gym. And it's very hard to maintain that quote unquote discipline or focus to continue going there. So, I mean, my journey for me has been one of ups and downs, and I think we could probably talk about it. We talk about my journey for discipline ad nauseum, but I will say this. I think a large part of discipline at this point, something I've been considering a little bit more is, at least for me, and I think maybe some people listening, and some of our students as well, stemming from how do you see yourself? What is your identity to yourself? And it sounds so bizarre to perhaps say, but people that always think that they're going to fail tend to always fail. People that think they're always going to succeed, no matter the obstacle, tend to win more and succeed. People who think that they are undisciplined and that's their lens are going to be undisciplined. I think people that see themselves as disciplined or building discipline or getting better at discipline end up being more disciplined. And so for me, it's one of the big things I wrote down today is when we think about discipline, how do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as disciplined or do you not? And what can you do to perhaps change the way you see the world, which is a real tough thing, and it can be, but I think we've got some tools we'll share as we go through the podcast.
It's interesting because, and I think about this episode, I think back to how I ended up to who I am today. And I think about my childhood. And I had a pretty turbulent childhood, which is not relevant for this podcast, but lots of challenges just because of family dynamics. And I didn't really have an identity for a long period of time. And so I found myself when I started meeting people that I revered, or people, I was at the generation where YouTube just became prevalent. So I'd start to see like famous drummers or famous bodybuilders. I'm like, well, what is it about that person that's a human that's different than me as a human? And I found myself, I was thinking about this morning, and this is a weird thing, I've never literally said this out loud, but I found myself telling myself lies. But in a positive way. Like, I am a world-class drummer. I am extremely fit bodybuilder. I am successful. I am handsome. I am confident. And I found myself saying these things over and over and over again because ultimately at the moments of time when I was quite young, I wasn't those things. But I came so committed to these things. In fact, I remember saying these things to people like, oh, I win drum contests all the time. I'm fantastic. And I wasn't. But it was, I was young, and I'd say these kind of things because it would kind of give me this fake it till you make it mentality, where to me, my head was there. And then when I would go into an environment where I wasn't one of those people, where I wasn't extremely fit, I wasn't successful on a musical instrument, I wasn't good at business, I'd enter in these environments and I would just throw myself into it, and then I'd realize how much I wasn't good. But I'd set this environment up in my head where I was like, I am this person. And the reason why I actually wrote down in my notes this thing I was listening to Andrew Hubert about, talking about ADHD and how people with ADHD are really, really good at setting, they're not good at achieving tasks unless they have a deadline or they see some major consequence. And for me, I think I accidentally set up these consequences of like, I'm not fulfilling who I actually am. Therefore, I'm going to work double as hard to become that person. And so now, I mean, I know you've said this to me, and I think people can be like, well, Brandon, you're successful at this. You're good at drums, you do all these things. But truthfully, I've just been telling myself that for 20 years. And I don't mean that to sound like an egocentric thing. It was actually out of raging insecurity. And it's interesting because it's helped me be so disciplined that I saw myself in a way, and I had no figures in my world that like, this is who I want to be. It was like, this is who I am. And then when I wasn't that person, the consequences of me not being there drove me to push further and further and further. Even to this day, I still have very high expectations of myself, which I think helps me to stay committed.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think this kind of feeds into a lot of different things I've been thinking about when it comes to discipline and stuff I've been researching and looking at. You know, I came back from the Tony Robbins event not too long ago, and they talk a lot about shifting your identity and the way you see yourself, and that's one of the things they talk about is, you know, I actually did this exercise this morning because I've been thinking about who it's going to make my identity as someone in business. And, you know, I wrote, you know, it starts with, and this is a great exercise for anyone to really do, I start with like writing down like what are the things that I believe about myself right now, the 2 or 3 big things I believe about myself right now that have made me successful in business and earning income so far. And that's like, I do believe that like if I put my mind to it, like I can ultimately achieve it. Like I know that like I have value and expertise in what it is that I do, and I'm confident with it. And then you look at, you know, what are your disempowering thoughts? And my disempowering thoughts are whenever I want to do something new, I have no idea where to start. And because of that, I just end up spinning my wheels. And the other thing is like, I really don't know where I want to go a lot of the time. And so without vision, you don't really have any kind of driving factors. And there's some other stuff I listed as well. And so like, you know, after you get through those, like, you know, what are the things that are most empowering for you and it's made you successful so far? What are the things that have been the least empowering for you? Where do you feel like your negative beliefs? You know, the third question is the big one, is like, what does it cost you? Right? What happens if you don't improve? And like, I don't mind being vulnerable with everyone here. Like I had a list of like 20 or 30 things, but it was just like, can't provide for my family. I have a stressful financial life for the rest of my life. I don't have the luxuries that I want, or I'm not going to be able to put food on the table for my family, or I'm going to constantly be wondering if I'm fulfilling my potential, like racking my brain around that. I'm never going to be able to help as many people as I want to make a change in the world. And then like the list goes on and on. That's off the top of my head, but like I'm really clear what happens if I don't change these beliefs about myself. And then, you know, I wrote down, right, essentially like what beliefs I would need to have. And I went through those and I just came up with like, okay, like I have to be somebody who is focused, who is unstoppable, and who's resourceful in order to make things happen for me. Like I have to keep coming back to that. It's like the identity that's going to pull me into another direction. And so, yeah, like a lot of times we can look at fear as a huge motivator to move us forward and push us into situations. But I think ultimately we also have to pull ourselves into like a new way of thinking and seeing ourselves ultimately, if that's going to help us. And it sounds like you went through something very similar, which was like, you know, like I'm not these things, but I'm going to tell people I am, and I'm going to work towards them. And ultimately, as you work towards them more and more, it became less lies and more truth, so to speak. It became a very true thing, which is ultimately what we do with the human body every time we exercise, people, which is neuroplasticity. Right? We're just talking about like pain pushes, awesome. Pleasure pulls, who do I want to be and what I'm going to be able to do when I am that person. And now we got to start working on this discipline thing. So I know this is kind of a long way to come back to come back to like discipline, but if you start shifting the way you see yourself and who you are, if you think of yourself as someone who's more disciplined, I think you will ultimately become more disciplined. And then there's also little actions that you can take as you go through, and other important distinctions. One of them we've talked about, committed versus motivated.
Yeah, I mean, and this is one that I definitely learned from Tom Purvis. I hate to say it, but it's definitely this idea of, you know, whatever journey you're on, I think that you have to have this vision of yourself, like you're saying, vision of the thing that you're aiming towards. And then also just realize, like, is it, you know, the question I've had for myself, which has been lately, is like, okay, well, everything here is great. I mean, we've got a great business. Glenn he's a very successful trainer. Taylor's a great, successful trainer. And so then the question is like, well, am I just on like, why do I need to push forward on certain things? Because things are so good here. Why don't I just try and find a way to be committed and enjoy life? But at the same time, you have to be careful of it turning into the, if you hear the kind of quintessential millennial thought process of like, well, I need lots of breaks, I need lots of time. I mean, there needs to be this division of like, you're committed towards this thing. I'm making sure I'm going to have the career to fulfill my family, right? You have that. We have that. Then lateral to that, how do you continue to grow there? But then at the same time, how do you also make sure that you're a human committed to your wife, your family, and have that good division at the same time? I mean, how much, and this is a question for any person, is like, how much do you need? How much do you want? Because the thing that I'd say that many of you probably can experience is if you end up in this place that we are, where you've got these super entrepreneur clients, I know you've got some of them and I have some, there are some people that have built monster companies that are worth tens, hundreds of millions, close to $1 billion maybe. But many of the ones I know have done it with incredible sacrifice, right? They have all this money, they're investing in themselves now. They didn't have a great relationship with their kids. They didn't have a great relationship with their wife. They didn't have a great relationship with their body. And many of them now, I don't know about for you, but I can think of a handful of people for me that have more money than I would know what to do with. But at the same time, have also have more ailments than I would know what to do with as they approach 60 years old. And so then there's this group of people that are kind of like this beautiful, happy medium where they have found fulfillment doing what they do. I was going to say helping people because that's our bias, but then also been very, very fruitful in their life. I have one guy who's not as successful, and then he goes away for a weekend alone and spends a weekend in the cabin alone while his wife's at home, and it's more because this is kind of like a cathartic behavior for his mentality. It's this interesting divide. Reason why I say all this is it's really easy when we say all this, and I know because I'm a bad example of this at times, to be committed towards a thing, have the discipline towards a thing, but then sacrifice so much to get there. And I will say this, and this is more of a much more personal thing. I made this mistake during 2020 and 2021. I don't want to say any words that'll algorithmically stop us from but in 20 and 21. But, I had a mental freak out around, because I have so much discipline where there's people we help here. I'm responsible to try and keep the roof and lights on here. At the same time, you have shared this vision with people like you and Taylor, where it's like, hey, you can have a successful career here. Taylor, you can have a successful career here. And everything was just stopped. And I had a panic. I've never feared failure, but this was one of those moments where it's like, you just started getting a stable, Glenn just moved at that point. He didn't have an unstable career, but he'd moved up here and was restarting. Yeah. Things were growing and then it stopped. Taylor, same thing. Gym membership, same thing. All my clients, same thing. And all of a sudden, all of these eggs that were in one Easter bag kind of got blown up. And so I hyper-disciplined into another business model, which is what we're doing now, which I'm so grateful for. But then when things started up, sorry for I'm granting
No,
here,
keep going,
but
buddy.
As things started to open up, I was just so spread where it was like a committed over here, and I really wasn't doing anything to make me happy. And that was a really interesting experiment for me because I was so disciplined towards the money-making stuff and helping people that I wasn't helping myself. And I think that, I know you're talking about this with some of the Tony Robbins stuff, I believe. There has to be this level of like, okay, I have the discipline and I know what I'm aiming toward my business. And I will sacrifice a lot to make sure I have the stability that I need for me and my family. But at the same time, how do you make sure that you're a happy human? And I think that's hard.
I don't think it's that hard. I think you have to understand where the lines are, and then just as you bring the same discipline to building your business, you then bring the same discipline to spending time with your family, and like the same amount of discipline to there's just shit in my life. Sorry, pardon my French. That I just know I have to cut out. That doesn't really bring me as much enjoyment. And maybe, and I know you're a pretty disciplined guy to begin with. Maybe that's not there for you. But there's a balance. We all have the same hours in the day, and how much of what we put ourselves through is the choice of doing that, then how much is something different, right? Do we not see the opportunities that are there to do things differently that might make our lives easier? I don't know, right? I don't know your situation. You don't know my situation. We don't know your situations. But I'm a firm believer that, if you can change your mindset, and I've been working on it like crazy for the past month, that you can be more happier, more joyful, and see the decisions that are going to be best for you from that state. Because I'll tell you, when you're upset and you're frustrated and things are going well, and you end up making choices logically from that place, it's not going to be the same things, and you're not going to take the same actions that you would if you think about your future that make you the most joyful, most happy, which doesn't mean there isn't hard work or discipline involved. But if you make decisions from that happy, joyful, like this is what my life's about place, you'll pull yourself in the direction that you want to versus the reactive place. And I don't know if that happened during that 2021 time or not. I know I've certainly been guilty of that over my entire life. I mean, I can't tell you how many bad like romantic relationships I was in because I was from a place of like loneliness versus from a place of who could be the most amazing partner. When I got really clear on what the best partner would look like, I found my wife. So it's crazy how that kind of happens. And I just want to take like a bit of a side because we've been going on a couple different tangents. I really like this podcast. This has been like a really enjoyable one. I hope you guys are enjoying listening to this at home here. I think there's something to be said, and just come back to the committed thing. There's also like committed versus motivated. I know Brent talked a lot about like the importance of commitment, and just in case it wasn't clear, motivation is a very fleeting thing.
I have a story for that.
I'm sorry. Just jump in.
Okay. No,
I was just going to clarify.
So I have a story around. And that's very good. And honestly, what you're about to say, we've talked about this before, which is good. But I want to share a story with you because it's much more of an example for me that is pragmatic. Because I've been saying this stuff for RTS. We've been saying it to all of our clients in here because truthfully, motivation is temporary, committed is forever. But I wasn't going to tell the story, but I'm much more comfortable with it now. For about 15 years, and it's hereditary, probably from just maybe being a higher energy person, maybe small amounts of ADHD in my family, I used to pick up my fingers. And it also started when I was really, really young. I did not learn how to speak for a long time until I was like 4 or 5. And when I learned how to speak, I started doing it very kinetically, where I use my hands and move a lot to communicate. And that was part of the way I conveyed information as a young person. And so what I started finding myself is I started going to like more working memory, deeper memory thoughts, really accessing knowledge to teaching RTS and teaching all this stuff. As my brain would go deeper into knowledge to talk about something, I would pick up my hands to the point that sometimes they would bleed and look terrible. But at the same time, I also have without sounding too egocentric, a lot of self-confidence where I was like, okay, well, listen, this is part of who I am. It's okay. So then when it came to my wedding time, I was like, okay, I am motivated to not have bad looking fingers for my photos for my wedding. So I temporarily stopped picking up my hands. I put up this barrier. Then I was going to Portugal, and I was like, I'm going to set up this thing where I'm going to stop picking up my hands so my hands don't look bad for Portugal photos. And then every time I would finish the thing, I would go right back to doing it. And then one day I had bad looking hands, and my son, Maxwell, 4, had a bloody tip on his finger. And he's like, I said, Max, what happened to your finger? He goes, oh, I hit it at school. I said, did someone bite you? And he goes, no, it's bloody, but you know what? Yours is like that too, so it's okay. And all of a sudden, the weight of this whole thing was like, this is much bigger than a cosmetic issue. This is actually now I'm influencing someone else's life because of this. And so I actually sought out the help of a psychiatrist that's a friend of mine, spent some time with her, and she gave me some very solid advice that I'd be happy to share, but outside of my scope for sure. And for me, since that 3 months ago, I haven't done it once. And it's not that I'm trying to share my victory. It's more of the actual, it was so much weight of how much I'm realizing the failure of me not learning how to stop doing this wasn't about me. It was about how it influenced other people. And so I became much more committed towards it. And truthfully, you may not be made.
We talked about it.
Yes, we talked about it. But also the same kind of thing in here, in this business, it's also what helps me stay on track, right? Because if I think about a behavior that I'm doing, even if I'm like, I don't want to actually do this, it's like I'm actually exercising this behavior bigger than my business. It's actually to be a good role model, lead by example for everyone that's here. And there's a lot of responsibility being human. There's a lot of responsibility. And so, Glenn is a husband, same thing with him and his wife and all of his clients. And I think that that's what's really, really cool is if we can kind of recognize, I hate to say it, but find where the failures will come potentially and what we can do to kind of work towards a positive experience around that. You can become truly committed towards something and make the behavior changes you need to have the discipline to succeed, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think ultimately there's some really interesting stuff. We've gotten a lot of different places today, so I just want to kind of go over a couple quick things here. Two things that Brad and I have talked about, maybe not two things. The first thing kind of in tandem is like, how are we seeing things from identity perspective? Because if you're always going to believe you're a failure, if you always believe that you're undisciplined, if you always believe you can't do it, guess what? That's probably the life you're going to live. But if you do work on changing the way you see the world, work on the neuroplasticity in your brain, learning to over time catch yourselves in those negative thoughts, replace them with new ones, look back and see your history of how you have been disciplined and start building that muscle in your brain, you will learn to be more disciplined over time because it's how you'll see yourself. We talked about how fear and worry and anxiety can be a powerful motivator to have you move forward. I think often it happens when we really have like an OS or an OF, like an O expletive moment with something that's really going to affect either us or someone we care about. I know I've had them where I was not great at managing money, and then my wife said to me, like, this is going to be an issue if we have a family. I'm like, oh, esh. I got to really get my ish together. I didn't think about it that way. And Brandon just talked about him and his family. So really, if you might have some of these moments where they just kind of happen. Otherwise, you got to do some work on your identity because you don't want to be floundering like this forever. Discipline is something that you can build. This is the last thing I'm going to put out there. Then we get the pick of the week. Brandon, did we talk about the mid-cingulate cortex last time?
Yes, we did.
We did talk about that a little bit. So like Brandon shared this excellent paper. Brandon and I have both listened to the Hebrew podcast where he talked about this. I think he even brought it up at the event that you and I went to. Brandon and I attended an Andrew Huberman event in Toronto. I remember he brought it up. He essentially talks about how there's this part of your brain called the mid-cingulate cortex, which is responsible for discipline and continuing to do hard work, so to speak, against the grain. And this area grows in response to, guess what, doing more hard work or being disciplined in the small little things. There's other things that you can do, like new novel exercises that your body is kind of revolting against and building up the burn against them. That will increase the size of this area.
You have to not like it. That's not it. It's not can't be hard. It has to. You have to not like it. Like if it's hard, that's fine. But you have to hate it.
Right. You have to really not like it. So guess what? Like doing things that you hate is a good way to go about it. Having said that, if we're okay, can I turn to my pick of the week, if that's okay, transition to it? My pick of the week is something that I learned at the Tony Robbins seminar, and it's interesting exercise you can do. I won't proclaim I'm not going to show the entire thing right now, but the thought process behind it, you can probably apply it yourself with very little thought. He called it the quality quantifier, if I'm not mistaken. But the whole idea is that you've got a scale from -10, this is disgusting, get out of my face, to 0, and then 0 to +10, this is the most amazing thing ever. And you take a look at either something that you want to remove from your life or something you want to add to your life, but something you're having a hard time being disciplined towards, a new skill, a new habit, whatever that thing would be. And for example, if you are trying to be more disciplined, and let's just say, to make it super simple, because we're all exercise professionals for the most part, you are trying to, right, a client or you're trying to get to the gym 5 days a week, right? Let's just say you don't exercise, you're trying to get to the gym 5 days a week. And you think about it right now and you're like, the idea of going to the gym, that's like a -3 for me. I don't like it, right? You ask yourself, what would it take to move from like a -3 to a -2? Well, maybe it looks like I just have like a really great playlist. That would actually make it a little bit more enjoyable. Okay, -2. What would take it from like a -2 to a -1? Well, maybe if I get it out of the way first thing in the morning, before work, that'd make it a little bit easier for me. So that'll take it to a -1. Okay, great. And what's the bigger to maybe just a neutral thing for you? I always do exercise that I like when I work out. I just avoid stuff that I hate right now. Okay, great, perfect. So like now you've got like 3 things that you can do to bake into your exercise process to take you from like a thing I don't like anymore to like something I kind of am neutral about. And then you kind of stack those things. So now you just add into your action plan, I'm going to create a playlist of 30 songs that I really love that get me really motivated in exercise. I'm going to schedule going to the gym before work. And I'm always going to have my first 3 exercises be things I really enjoy that I look forward to going to do. And all of a sudden, you've taken it from like a -3 to a 0. And now you've got some more, like, instead of having to be like, push yourself and be super, super disciplined, you've now just removed the barriers to getting that thing done. And you do the same thing, right, for something you want to add to your life. For me, right, I think about like -3. Don't want to look at financial stuff. Just don't enjoy it. Never like numbers. Well, the thought of being like someone who is like really adored by my wife by how much I've progressed with my finances, that brings me to like a -2. And then being able to see how like my bank account, my savings have grown over time, that takes me probably to a 0. And then to be able to save up for that vacation and to take that next year, that would bring me to like a +3. So all of a sudden I've got some great reasons and habits and motivations and things for making me do that. What's something I could do to now make myself just enjoy doing the financial stuff? Maybe it looks like I keep track of a little habit tracker so I can see how it makes me feel every time knowing that it's going to make me elated to do something I don't typically love to do. And now I've got like a positive force. So now I'm like pulling myself in that direction versus fighting it. So I know it's a bit longer than I want to put out there, but this idea of like really looking at how you can make things that you don't love more enjoyable and then baking that into your process, and then taking a look at how you can perhaps take things that like you absolutely love, but then making them not so great. Like, quick example, I love eating chocolate. I'm at like a +10 for that. Well, like I think about how it makes me feel the next day, low energy, don't want to go to work, feel like garbage. That brings me to like a kind of like a +4. And if I keep ruminating on that, I know I'm going to get lower and lower. And that for me is a great way to help me stop eating chocolate at nighttime. I'll digress. I can keep going. I love the stuff. My pick of the week is Quality Quantifier.
My pick of the week is a totally different direction. We just got a new machine at the gym. If you haven't seen it on our Instagram, it's the Freak Athlete Nordic Hyper. It's a 6-in-1 machine. We actually ordered a piece to make it an 8-in-1 that'll be here in the summer. It is absolutely fantastic. For the money, it is absolutely worth it. If you're a home gym or you're a fitness facility, being able to do Nordic curls, adjustable the back extensions, the abdominal exercises, the split squats, like really everything as far as its size and how easy it is to adjust, even though there's a lot of adjustments, it's amazing. So look up Freak Athlete Nordic Hyper. They should call it something else than a Nordic Hyper, but honestly, you can do so much with it. And I've just been nerding out. And if you're watching this in real time, it is May 14th. Check out our Instagram because the last 4 or 5 reels have been things about it with Glenn and myself and Lucy. There's some really cool stuff up there. Definitely check it out. It is well worth the money if you're contemplating it, and a nice addition to any gym. But anyway, everyone, thanks so much for being here. A lot of fun, a little deeper than I meant for it to go, but truthfully, discipline is a pretty deep thing. There's a lot of facets to it. So hope you had a fun day. Hope you enjoyed the podcast, and we'll see everybody real soon.
Hope everyone had a fun day too. Take care, everybody.